grab it from me, all right? Now, we are going to have our first panel on geopolitical, geoeconomic issues with two absolute stalwarts. I won't steal the thunder, and Maina Chawla will introduce them, but let me take a moment to introduce Dr. Maina Chawla Singh. We at Indiaspora have had the privilege of knowing Maina for several years, and this was when her husband Arun was stationed as the Indian ambassador in Washington, D.C. I normally don't like to do this, but Maina is such a highly accomplished woman that I'm going to take a couple of seconds just to read her bio off of a note that I have here. So Dr. Maina Chawla Singh is a former faculty at Georgetown American University and the University of Delhi. She is also an author, and with several academic publications to her credit. She's a scholar of migration and diaspora, and that's another link that we have with her for her professional work from the Indiaspora perspective, and has published her research on Indian Jews in Israel, Indians in Guadeloupe, and Indian Americans in US politics. She has lectured at Yale, Cornell, Oxford, Georgetown, UPenn, Ann Arbor, Michigan, New York University, Tel Aviv, Sciences Po in Paris, and various others. So if I could have the pleasure, and if you could please put your hands together, I'd like to invite Maina up to the stage. Do you want this or do you want this? Okay, thanks a lot.
So is this, are we good? Do I need to, we're good? Good afternoon. As I was driving up, thinking about the fireside chat, the fireside chat has this warm and fuzzy feeling. And we were driving through a hot and muggy afternoon. And I thought to myself, do we need to indigenize this? Kuch karna chahiye? Maybe rechristen it? Any suggestions for what we can call a monsoon chat? Monsoon baatcheet? Maybe coffee pe charcha? Does that ring a bell? Anyway, that was something I thought about and said, fireside chat ko kuch karna chahiye. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure to be here. It's especially a great pleasure for me because I had the good fortune of being at the first kickoff event in Mahonk when Indiaspora was launched. MR, thank you for the dream that you dreamt and for making it a reality. Where are you, MR? Say hello. Okay. So, fortunately, I have been around to see many of the milestones as Indiaspora grew. And the other milestone I think of is when the first Indian-American ball was organized on the sidelines of the presidential balls, which are a very major tradition in Washington, D.C. It was like the arrival, a statement that was made. It was very successful. The energy at that ball was one of zest and confidence, and I still have very, very wonderful memories of that. So, MR, thank you. You and your team. Indiaspora team is now growing, and Diaspora now has global visions and towards integrating Indian diasporas. I have a special interest in diasporas and have had the good fortune of being able to watch the progress of the Indian American diaspora in terms of its political growth, political assertion, and there are several people in this room who had the good fortune of interviewing over the years. In 2009, as I was collecting stories, I remember my husband said to me, he said, I want to introduce you to somebody. And I was introduced to this gentleman. This was on the sidelines of Prime Minister Manmohan Singh's visit. And I had a long chat with this person. He is the son of first-generation Indian immigrants who actually went even before the Nationality Act was passed in 1965, which opened the floodgates to a lot of Indian professors, academics, physicians who migrated to America. The son of Savitri and Prem, I think his name was, is here with us today. He was then posted in the White House. He was a political appointee, and I met him in the White House on the sidelines of those events. It is my pleasure to introduce Ambassador Rich Verma. Please. He later became the US Ambassador to India, and it is my pleasure to welcome him here. I'm going to say a few things that I know from his bio, but I wanted to personalize it because Ambassador Verma's and our paths have crossed several times. His appointment to New Delhi was one that made us all very proud. And as a diaspora scholar, I have one other image that is embedded in my memory, which is that when Prime Minister Modi arrived for his visit in 2016, his first visit to Silicon Valley, actually, there were 4 people to welcome him at the tarmac on the red carpet. 2 Americans and 2 Indians, all 4 brown people. Ambassador Rich Verma was there. He had flown in from India, and there was Nisha Biswal, and there were 2 other brown Indians. And for a diaspora scholar, that was a really wonderful image to see. Ambassador Verma he is currently General Counsel at Mastercard and Head of Global Public Policy. He has a 25-year stellar career of international experience in business, in law, in the military, in diplomacy. He has served as Assistant Secretary of State and held several other assignments on Capitol Hill. He has practiced law for many law firms and consulting firms. He has been former Vice Chairman of the Asia Group. He is also a US Air Force veteran, decorated with multiple service awards. He serves on multiple corporate and university boards. He holds multiple degrees, his J.D. from American University and his Ph.D. from Georgetown, and those are 2 special universities because I have taught at both of those universities, so thank you. I will now introduce Ambassador Vardhan Shringla. Please join us on the stage. He is the Chief Coordinator. Ambassador Shringla is the Chief Coordinator of India's G20 presidency at the moment. He has an illustrious career as an Indian Foreign Service diplomat. He has been ambassador to the US during the time of Howdy Modi. He has headed our missions. I say our missions because I'm Indian. That's just happens to be that way. That's why I said it. He has headed our missions in Bangladesh, in Thailand. In his 4-decade-long illustrious career, he has served in multiple geographies, in multiple capacities, including doing multilateral work in India's mission to the UN in New York. He has also been extensively involved in India's Neighborhood First initiative. He has served in Vietnam, in South Africa, and as I said, he has been very much a part of the phase when Howdy Modi was the big event in the US. Ambassador Shringla has an avid interest in the outdoors. I was very interested to hear that he's also a mountaineer. Wonderful. So I have both former ambassadors here who have championed historic US-India bilateral cooperation in defense, in trade, in clean energy. We couldn't have chosen a better set of people to discuss US-India relations. For those of you who may have wondered what I'm doing here, yes, I'm a scholar of diaspora. There is also another side of my life experience which does not figure in my bio. I have not worked in the embassies, but I have worked, I would like to think, for the embassies of India. I'm part of that silent, ornamental, segment of embassy life that you sometimes see but don't hear. And you certainly don't hear our views. But I'm delighted to be here. And gentlemen, I would love for you to start the conversation reflecting on perhaps the last decade or so that each of you has served in different capacities representing your own countries to further bilateral relations between India and the US. The stage is yours. Thank you.
Okay, Maina, thank you very much for the introduction. I will say it's an incredible honor to be here with the ambassador, really a true champion of U.S.-India relations, but really of Indian diplomacy around the world. And your new posting leading the G20 efforts is so significant. Let me also just say a word. This 10-year anniversary of Indiaspora, I saw some of the video clips of those conversations that MR had with people 10 years ago about this conference in upstate New York. MR had the same conversation with me 10 years ago. It was a very good conversation. I remember thinking when he walked out of the room, this is never gonna happen. No one's gonna, who's gonna show up in upstate New York? Turned out to be an incredible event, and MR to this day, and Sanjeev and the entire organization, an incredible convening power. What you've done and achieved is just so amazing. Thank you for everything that you've done. I want to turn it over to Ambassador Shringla. I just maybe take a moment to talk to you a little bit about where we are in the U.S.-India relationship. I think we're in a very strong place, and we've not always been in a very strong place. This 75 years moment, I think, there's a few things I think we should reflect on. You know, we often forget, we tend to think of U.S.-India history as being actually quite negative, and that we were estranged partners for many years, especially during the Cold War. And that is true. But that leaves out a big chunk of U.S.-India history, and I remind people that you actually have to go back to 1947 and to the 50s and to the early 60s. You know, there were two U.S. presidents, President Eisenhower and President Kennedy, that were incredibly excited about this relationship. If you read the speeches of President Eisenhower when he was here, or even then Senator Kennedy, when he was on the Senate floor, you would think it was 2016 or 2018 or 2020. You know, Kennedy gave a speech that talked about the hinge of fate in Asia rests with India. The fate of Asia rests with India because India was a democracy, and he said, we are gonna support India at all turns, and he did that in an incredible way. In fact, in 1962, when India was facing very direct threat from China, President Kennedy committed incredible amount of US support in that defense. So we forget about that first chapter. There's obviously the second chapter during the Cold War, during the Nixon administration, and we had a very kind of bad relationship, for lack of a better word, from 1965 through the early 1990s. And it was with President Clinton's kind of last year and a half or last 2 years in office where things really changed. And he came here in the year 2000. And that set forward what I would call a 22-year period of upward trajectory in US-India relations. But if you think of it in those three phases, that first positive phase, the middle phase of being negative, and then this last 22 years, that's about 40 years of progress and about 30 to 35 years of kind of estrangement. So let's just remember as we talk about our history that, and Prime Minister Modi said this to us when he came to Washington, we've overcome these hesitations of history. A lot of that history is actually quite good if we reach back into some of those earlier days. There are a lot of reasons why we've had this upward trajectory. The civil nuclear deal, the de-hyphenization of India and Pakistan and the US approach, the personal relationships, the work of individuals in this relationship, and we can talk about some of that. I will just say that we shouldn't assume that 22 years of positive trajectory in this relationship means we're destined to have another 22 years of positive developments in the relationship, and we really have to work at it. There are some challenges today, Russia, Ukraine being one of them, trade, some other issues that we have to talk about and work at. But when I was serving here, I said that this was and continues to be the most consequential relationship for this century if we get it right, if we get it right. And so that's why this is so important that we talk about it. That's why these forums are so important, because a lot of the work is not going to be between governments. It's going to be the work that all of you do. So I just wanted to set the scene on the phases that we've been through, some very good, some very difficult, but that we're in a bit of a, I think, a refresh period here, and we should, all of us need to chart out what that next period looks like. But Ambassador, you spent a lot of time in Washington, a lot of time here, and working on this relationship. I'd welcome your thoughts.
Well, thank you very much, Rich. Let me begin by saying what a great pleasure it is to be here at the Indiaspora Forum. As I was driving up to come here, it struck me that this is one event I couldn't have missed for anything. And I have to attribute that to the fact that 6 to 8 months ago, MR came and met me in my office, and he said, we're going to have this global forum and you have to be on it, block it on your calendar. So here we are, and it's great to meet so many of our friends today on this occasion. You've taken us through a little historic tour of the relationship, Ambassador, and I think it's fair to say that as we celebrate 75 years of our relationship today, or this year, our relationship has seen its ups and downs. I mean, like any other relationship, there's been some high points and low points. But I'm firmly of the view that the inherent potential that we've always felt exists in this relationship based on the principles and values that both our countries hold so dear is finally on its way to being realized. And today we are in a good place, and I think we have over the last couple of decades, and you also mentioned some of the important landmarks that have taken us where we are, have been very, very seminal in bringing us to this point. But you also mentioned that it's been possibly individuals and various actors have contributed to this. And I would firmly believe, and so as someone who's served in Washington, someone who's worked closely with a range of interlocutors, I firmly believe that it is actually the work of individuals that has made the vital difference in where our relationship stands. These individuals are not always those who are in the forefront. They're also individuals who played an important role, in positions that they've been, but not necessarily very visible always. And some of those individuals right here, of course, Ambassador Rich Verma and I have worked closely together in Washington. And our work hasn't always been, in formal meetings. I remember a very, very useful evening that we spent at the house of Governor Murphy of New Jersey. Here was the governor of a very important state in the US. He'd never visited India. In fact, no governor of New Jersey had ever visited India. Yet, New Jersey had the highest proportion of Indian Americans living in that state. I think 4% of New Jersey were Indian Americans. And Rich and I sat with him, and we spent an entire evening talking about what he could do and what were the potentials of this relationship. And that's, I think, it's a lot of background work that makes this relationship successful. I remember visiting San Francisco. MR called me over to his place, and I was really absolutely surprised at the sort of range of people that you got to meet there. It's just like the who's who of Silicon Valley. And if you think of the fact that we've had huge success in our startup industry, we've had unicorns that have been have materialized out of this initial sort of effort at encouraging our young people to go in for, to commercialize their technologies, I think you will have to see it as the result of very, very successful support that we received from venture capitalists, from the financial and technology czars who sit in California and other places. And so if we look at the relationship, it is the result of a lot of efforts of people, and especially Indian Americans who have not only contributed to this situation that we're in by their own personal successes, and that cumulative success tells its own story, but also by their willingness to strengthen and contribute to this relationship. And so we've looked at the historic part. I just want to flag a few more recent events. I think, when the Prime Minister Modi first went to the US after he became, took over in 2014, he developed over a period of time an excellent connect with President Obama, and I think you were here at that time, Rich. So that is a factor that has been an important factor in the way our relationship has developed. Subsequently, President Trump came on, and the Prime Minister again, and he developed a good relationship. Dr. Maina mentioned Howdy Modi. Howdy Modi was a unique event because you had 50,000 Indian Americans sitting, in Houston with the US President and the Indian Prime Minister actually addressing them, and it was an incredible event. President Trump came to India, and we greeted him in the form of Namaste Trump in Ahmedabad, and we had 100,000 people in that stadium in Gujarat. And of course, I had the good fortune to accompany Prime Minister Modi to Washington, D.C. for the first Quad Summit, Prime Minister Modi's first interaction with President Biden in his current capacity, and Vice President Kamala Harris, and I think we haven't looked back since. Now, so the strength of this relationship, I think, and why I say that it has probably realized its fullest potential, is the fact that you've seen a series of changes in administrations in the US. You've seen the changes in government in India itself, from Prime Minister Manmohan Singh to Prime Minister Modi. But the relationship has only gone from strength to strength. And what I think was important for us was to watch the transition between President Trump and President Biden. And I think, if nothing else, President Biden has successfully strengthened that relationship by bringing in new initiatives. The first Quad Leaders Summit in Washington, D.C. You've had the second summit in Tokyo since. You've had the Indo-Pacific Economic Forum. You've had the Build Back Better World. You've had climate partnerships, a range of initiatives that have strengthened that relationship. And I think, but I do agree that we should not rest on our laurels. Nothing can be taken for granted. This is a relationship that you have to constantly work on. And it's not the work just of governments, it's the work of individuals. I see a whole range of people here who really worked on the relationship. And I think this is why I'm confident that as we move forward, this is going to be continue to be a successful and a very, very close relationship.
Yeah, Ambassador, one of the things that you did when you were in the United States is you traveled around the United States a lot, and you visited the diaspora community, the Indian American community, and what they were doing. I did the same thing here. I was able to make it to every state in India, and people used to ask, I think both of us, why are you leaving the capitals of your country to go out and meet all the people? And what I would say is, look, the real glue that holds the two countries together are actually at that individual level. They're the work of people all across the country, whether it's in science or technology and medicine and in crafts, whatever it happens to be. It's in the academic and research community, obviously the business community. But that's the real fabric that pulls us together. My dad came to the US in 1963, tells a great immigrant story about showing up with $14 and a bus ticket. Some days he has $22, some days $14. But the intent of the story is to say I started over. We settled in Pennsylvania. He taught for 43 years at the University of Pittsburgh. But he also, and my mother, made sure we retained our Indian traditions or Indian culture, and they were also great contributing members of their new kind of American home. And that's, I think, part of the recipe that will continue to make sure that these two countries do well together. Now, there's a lot of areas that I'd love to see our two countries really build out. One is obviously in the defense and security area. I think we've obviously sold a lot of defense products to India. Our militaries train together. I had the good fortune of going to every exercise that our two countries do together around the world. It gives you great confidence, but there's a lot more we can do there. India has been designated a major defense partner of the United States. That is a status that no other country holds. It is a bit of a blank slate. We should do more to build out that status between the US and India as a major defense partner. For those of you from the US, call upon your kind of elected representatives to really try to get that kind of institutionalized in US law as best we can. You know, the model was supposed to be built on the US-Israel security relationship. That's what we were aspiring to with the US-India defense relationship, so that we knew India was going to continue to get the best and the most sophisticated defense equipment. I think we should continue to work on that for sure. Going away from the defense side into the human side, I really do think education is an area that is yet still not lived up to its potential. Yes, there are a lot of Indian students in the United States, and that's a great thing. There are too few American students studying in India. That number is just a few thousand. That number really should be 100,000 or more. And again, talk about building lifelong relationships and lifelong research partners at the individual level. If we could work on that education component, I think that would be really important. And the third area, which I think is super important, is the trade area, where we actually have, this really surprises people when I tell them, we don't actually have any trade agreement between the United States and India, almost nothing. So companies and businesses and people are left to fend for themselves. There's no way to kind of take that two-way trade number, which is about $160, $170 billion, and put it closer to where it should be, which is about $500 billion or $600 billion. So we need to work on that trade in all aspects of it: digital trade, advanced technology, collaboration. Part of that is going to have to be a conversation about skilled workers and visas and how to work together with the two tech industries, but we shouldn't keep putting those issues to the side. So defense, education, trade, obviously climate and clean energy. I think healthcare, the pandemic saw us come together in a way that was super important, but we could do better. We could do better on vaccine development between us. We can do better on the distribution of key medicines and technologies. And I know the Quad is a part of that. I just say I'm excited about the Quad. But I should also mention another kind of Quad in and of itself, which is the I2U2,
yeah.
Right? Israel, India, UAE, and the United States. That's a new arrangement. That's super flexible. That's really creative. You know, when I talk about this being a key relationship, we've got to build the structure that is unlike the 20th century. So if the 20th century had the US engaged in treaty partnerships around the world, these new structures are even more interesting and even more creative, and I think we should look at those kinds of arrangements. So I'd welcome your thoughts, Ambassador. The clock tells me we've got about 10 minutes left, but I'd welcome your thoughts on where we're headed into the future and those areas we should focus on.
Thank you, Rich. I think, listening to you, what struck me was that the relationship between India and the United States is one that is today comprehensive and multifaceted. And I say this because having served in many other geographies, I've seen relationships that are based on a single product or a single area of interest. It could be defense. It could be that we are buying phosphates, or we are buying oil or diamonds, or there is a diaspora, but you rarely see a relationship that is as rounded in terms of the different sectors that we cover as the India-US relationship. I think this is the relationship that really covers every dimension of human exchanges that you can have. And I think the most important component, in my view, as I mentioned before, is the people-to-people connect. It is actually this connect that has really enabled the relationship to come where it is. And you know, quite early on, as you mentioned, I realized in my term in Washington that to understand the United States and to be able to really work on strengthening that relationship, you had to go outside Washington. I mean, Washington was important, but it wasn't the only place where you could, I would say, get equities onto the table. And so I made it a point to travel as extensively as possible. I covered 22 states. And wherever I went, it was a short trip, a day and a half, 2 days. But I always made it a point to meet not just the governor, but also a wide cross-section of political, I would say, representatives. You met businesses, you met you know, the diaspora, of course. I mean, you go to Florida, you go to North Carolina, you see diaspora that is most, I would say, accomplished, and you are able to understand that here are people who have achieved a certain level of, I would say, you know, status in society, and is really looking to see how they could help that larger relationship. And if you can leverage that support, then I think you are much better off in whatever you do. So the people-to-people connect has been vital. We've had some very trying times, occasionally on and off in Congress, sometimes initiatives that have not always, I would say, brought the relationship out in the best of light. But you needed to work with the Indian diaspora. You needed to work closely with them in order to reach out to their representatives to say, look, here are the facts of the matter. This is actually what you need to take into consideration. And I found that we always achieved very, very good successes. You mentioned trade, and I think trade is a very important area. We worked very hard in the Trump administration to try and get even a limited, restricted trade agreement. I think as a result of our negotiations, we had identified a certain package of goods that could be covered under the free trade agreement. Unfortunately, finally, decision didn't come out in that in the way that we wanted it to. But till the last moment, I think we were hopeful that we could have gone on an as-is, where-is basis. Whatever you've achieved in your negotiations, you close that and seal the deal. Today, we've signed free trade agreements with a lot of our trusted partners, with Australia, with the UAE. We're negotiating with the UK, with the European Union. And I did mention the other day that it's inconceivable that we would not have a free trade agreement with the United States. So we hope that as we go along, we would have the opportunity to have a free trade agreement with the US. The other aspect, which is defense, I think the security and defense relationship is critical, considering that about a decade or two ago, we had no exchanges on the defense side or minimal exchanges. Today, I think we have exchanges across the board. Some of the largest military exercises are conducted between the US and India. And of course, the fact that we are looking at the US as a source of sophisticated equipment, defense equipment, is important. But we also have to understand that today, the issue of resilient and sustainable supply chains has I think, become important in the light of COVID and our experiences. Today, I have an Atmanirbhar policy, which is essentially a level of self-sufficiency, but it also means that we strengthen ourselves to be able to contribute to the larger world in keeping with our vision, the Prime Minister's vision of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which is work for the global common good. And in order to do that, we need to make sure that we have the essentials to be able to hold our own. And here, I think it is important that we work closely with the US defense industry to encourage more collaborations, more joint ventures, more technology transfers, which is, in my view, a win-win situation, because that way we'll be able to go in for new markets and new opportunities that didn't exist before. So we really opened more doors in that regard. So it is, I think, a relationship that it transcends the political area. It's actually a relationship that is bolstered by people, by trade, business, of course, and of course, common values and principles that we spoke about. And of course, we look into the future. We have to, 75th year is in some senses for us in India an inflection point. We want to, this is our time to look ahead. And we are planning for the next 25 years what we call Amrit Kal. What would we be like 25 years down the line in 2047 when we achieve 100 years of our independence? What is the planning that we are doing in that regard? We are a $3 or $4 trillion economy. We are one of the larger economies. But by the year 2047, we want to become a $30 trillion economy. We want to see the aspirations of our younger generation, and we are a young nation, fully realized. We want to see ourselves having cleaner air, cleaner water, which is climate change issues. In all of this, we need to work closely with the United States. And I have no doubt that whether it comes to whether this political connect that is important is something that we should work to continue, but we should also bring in areas that would sustain the relationship in a futuristic way. Green hydrogen is one area. Critical and emerging technologies is another area. How do we work on sustainable and reliable supply chains is a third area. And how do we leverage this potential of young people in India and the large Indian diaspora in the United States is something that we need to consider. So I know the time is running short and we must give you the last word, Rich, so please go ahead.
No, and look, we've talked about all the positive elements of the relationship, and we shouldn't sugarcoat or pretend that everything is perfect. In two big, complicated democracies, there are going to be differences, and we have those differences, and we have differences today, and there are geopolitical issues swirling around us that do present challenges, and because of our histories, take us in potentially two different directions. I think what I've seen out of the Biden administration and really out of the last few years is the ability and interest in sitting down and talking about those differences. And as long as that continues, I think that's going to be super important. What I'd also just maybe leave you with and just remind you of is that ultimately this relationship is one that is built on ideas and values and principles. And it's, yes, the sales are important and the business is important and the transactions are important and the visas issued are important. But if we forget about those shared values that actually have brought us together, frankly, for longer than 75 years, our great writers and philosophers have been talking about the principles of democracy and human rights and constitutional checks and balances for a long time. I used to love to talk to people about our two constitutions starting with the same three words, we the people. And so it is ultimately that set of values and set of ideas that actually sets us apart. So when we look at this 22-year surge in our relations over the last 20 years, it has come at a time when the large parts of the world are not embracing or sharing or carrying on those same values. And that global system that has been built up is under threat, is under duress. And that's why this partnership is special, and that's why it stands out. And that's why back in 2006, when I was a staffer in the Senate, a then chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee said, Senator Biden said at that time that if in the year 2020, the United States and India are the closest friends and partners, the world will be a safer and more prosperous place. That remains very much true. That is a guiding principle we shouldn't forget. This is a bipartisan, nonpartisan relationship embraced across the aisle in the United States. We have a lot of work to do, but I'm excited about our future ahead of us. I'm grateful to all of you. Ambassador, I'm grateful to you for your service, and our best days really do remain in front of us. So thank you for giving us this opportunity. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.